Hi, everyone. This is DeRollo Nixon from Nixon Disability Law coming to you again from our offices in our Veterans Month campaign. Perhaps you saw our most recent video for Veterans Day. There was a special episode about the Navajo Code Talkers. If you haven't, please check it out. You can find it on our YouTube channel or on Facebook, and eventually it will make its way to our website. Anyway, as you all are aware, we're doing a Veterans Month campaign where we bring you history, trivia, and important information for veterans to know. And also it helps the general public understand the great impact that veterans make to our communities. So we're still on the sub part of our series about the relationship between Congress and veterans. We're now into the 20th century, and ironically, even though the war occurred in the 19th century, there are still implications from the Civil War that played out in the 20th century. As you may recall from our last full episode on this issue, I ended with a question about whether or not there were any Confederates who received U.S. federal veterans benefits, despite the fact that they were fighting against the federal government. Now, the answer is we don't know. Eventually, Congress did authorize a bill that would afford to Confederate veterans the same benefits received by Union veterans, okay? But that was only passed in 1957. So the answer is we don't know. At the time it was passed, if I recall correctly, there was one potential recipient who I believe was a woman who was a daughter of a Confederate officer, and she passed away subsequent to the enacting of that bill. And so the short answer is we don't know if any Confederates or related parties ever collected a U.S. veterans pension. Anyway, so we're now into the 20th century. We're going to back up a few decades from that point to the First World War. As I mentioned in the last episode, right before the First World War, the income tax bill was passed, and actually became a constitutional amendment to allow for income tax. That almost coincided with the beginning of World War I. And our participation, of course, didn't start until approximately 1917. If you were like me and you were a history buff in school, surprise, surprise, you remember things like the Zimmerman telegram and the sinking of the Lusitania and how that dragged the U.S. into this conflict going on over there in Europe. Anyway, did you know that the total number of U.S. veterans prior to the Civil War was only between 600,000 and 700,000? But the total number of service members during World War I was more than 4 million. Exactly. So it's between a 6 to 7-fold increase in the number of service members versus all the previous wars combined, okay? Which is great. That larger picture is characteristic of the 20th century, characteristic of the relationship between Congress and veterans during the 20th century. Also, things were just going to get bigger and better as we went forward. Anyway, little tidbit. As you may be aware, the total number of U.S. service members who were killed during World War I was a little bit over 63,000. And that's both on the battlefield, but also in theater, okay? It should be noted that that conflict, which of course ceased on Armistice Day, right, which you now know was November 11, 1918, that the amount of soldiers who died during that war was eclipsed the following year by the number of influenza deaths. That was one of the biggest worldwide epidemics in recent years. Anyway, fast forward past there to 1930. In 1930, Congress passed a bill that consolidated many of the veterans programs under one heading called the Veterans Administration, and that was the immediate forerunner to the current Department of Veterans Affairs. And in our next episode, we're going to talk more about that, and we will talk about the biggest war in our nation's history, which was World War II. World War II is important for several reasons, but one of them is for almost everyone watching this video, you're likely to know vets from that war or have met veterans from that war, but not likely to have met veterans from wars before then, okay? And so that's one of the reasons World War II and U.S. World War II veterans are important, okay? And we'll talk about Dory Miller, one of my favorite veterans. It's for a family reason that he's one of my favorite veterans, but I will discuss more about that next time. Thanks for tuning in.